Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the board, I'd like to invite Ms. Clay to remain at the podium for informational item D1C. Ms. Clay.
Good afternoon again, Madam Chair, members of the board, and Superintendent Davids. As we near the close of the calendar year, it is hard to believe, but it is time to set our sights on planning for fiscal year 2024. Before we discuss the FY24 budget calendar, it is important to provide a quick review of fund accounting and remind the community of the funds that the board takes action on annually. In accordance with state law, school system financials are governed by governmental accounting standards. These standards organize accounting on a fund basis, which allows unique tracking of revenues, which are considered sources of income, and expenditures, which are considered uses of income for specific purposes. Per governmental accounting standards, we create funds for unique programs for which funding has been identified. Funds that have similar purposes can be aggregated to a summary fund level. And annually, we present the superintendent's recommended budget across 4 aggregate funds in accordance with Board Policy DC. The first of the 4 funds is the general fund, which is the account used for our daily operations like salaries, instructional supplies, maintenance costs, etc. Next is the special revenue fund. This fund accounts for grants given to Henry County Schools for designated and supplemental purposes, as well as the financials associated with our school nutrition program and our after-school program, which are enterprising activities. Next is the Capital Projects Fund, which allows for separate tracking of revenues and expenditures related to the capital improvements projects authorized by the board. And finally, there's the Debt Service Fund, which captures the revenue and expenses associated with the long-term debt that has been incurred to finance those capital projects in advance of the revenues received. There are a myriad of external and internal inputs that must be considered in developing the budget for each of these funds. The timing of when key information is available drives the timeline of the budget calendar that is presented. Let's walk through a visual that outlines the sequence of events that supports the budget development process. Since the specifics of the budget development process varies for each fund, I will focus on the general fund in this walkthrough to outline the variety of inputs and the timing of those inputs that must be considered. The general fund receives state, local, and federal sources of funding, with state and local generally providing 99.5% of the revenues allocated for general fund purposes. Accordingly, external activity, such as the governor's budget recommendation, the state's budget process, and Henry County tax processes have a significant impact on our system's budget planning. Looking at this calendar, starting in January, we carefully monitor the news coming from the governor's office and the Gold Dome, January through April, to identify and analyze legislative activity and its impact on school systems and our budget development. To forecast local revenues, moving more to the March timeframe, we partner with the tax assessor's office to understand changes that are occurring in the local tax digest. This information begins to emerge in March and is continually refined until the assessor's appeals process ends. As the General Assembly and local tax officials complete work that informs the revenue forecast and provides intel on potential new costs associated with legislation, the superintendent directs a series of internal tasks, which are now shown at the bottom of the slide, to develop allocation recommendations that support student learning at the highest levels. As you may recall from our time together last year, there are multiple opportunities for the board members to share budgetary priorities that inform the superintendent's budget recommendations. Other key inputs into the budget development process include enrollment projections, school and division assessments, and strategic plan investment opportunities. Before I move on from this slide, I do want to pause and just walk through some of the key components for understanding. The legislature will convene on January 9th of 2023 for this upcoming FY24 planning. The governor's budget is shared with the legislature within 5 days of the General Assembly convening. This is key information that we will hone into as we begin to prepare our own internal analysis. After reviewing the governor's recommendation, the House and the Senate work together through appropriation bills until each body has been able to set their goals and find alignment on common recommendations and appropriations. The governor will take required action or follow the appropriations bill to law. Locally, we discuss the trends of the local tax digest But this information does not fully crystallize until after the appeals process, which is 45 days after notices are mailed. Again, the state funding accounts for more than 50% of our general fund revenue sources, and when you combine that with the local sources, that is well over 99% of our general fund income. The superintendent is required to present a balanced budget for the board's action. So while the external activities set the parameters for what expenditures we can occur, the superintendent, as informed by dialogue of the board and our community-inspired strategic plan, provides a recommendation of expenditures that is supported by revenues. As this visual demonstrates, there are a lot of processes and inputs that must be considered during the budget development process. With an understanding of key inputs and timing, I will now present the FY24 Budget Development Calendar. This document will be available in the board meeting attachments. As I shared earlier, the state legislative session will run January to April, and I will provide reports in the months to follow that elevate the board's budgetary priorities and gives insights on how the information coming out of the General Assembly impacts our budget forecast. The tentative budget will be presented April 17th, and we will hold our first of 2 required budget hearings. Following the hearing, the board will have the opportunity to tentatively adopt the budget. The final proposed budget will be presented on May 8th. A second budget hearing will be hosted, and the board will have the opportunity to adopt the final proposed budget on May 8th. I'll conclude my report highlighting the foundational work this board has done to ensure we have a clear compass that guides the prioritization of resources, your commitment to a unified governance model, and allocating funding to support strategic initiatives that achieve priority student outcomes is a key lever in ensuring your vision, that every student in Herring County Schools receives a high-quality, world-class education. Dr. Davis, that concludes what I've prepared, and I turn the floor back to you.